I bought my house 3 years ago, and the thing that drew me in was the driveway. Well, it was more like a private road that led to my house. It's long, about 400 feet, so it provided some much-needed privacy, especially with how the neighborhood was laid out. My section was the second phase of the development, and because of this weird layout, my driveway also gave people access to a walking trail. At first I thought, all right, that's cool, and I didn't mind. But I'll tell you, things started to go sideways when the HOA got involved. So a couple of years ago, my wife and I decided it was time to upgrade the driveway. The old asphalt had cracked and it just wasn't looking good. We spent nearly $5,000 on interlocking pavers. We put a lot of time into it, but when it was done, it looked amazing. Our neighbors complimented us on how great it turned out. That was fine until this spring when things took a wild turn. I came home one Tuesday evening in April and couldn't get into my own driveway. 3 SUVs were parked, taking up the entire width of the entrance. I thought maybe there was an emergency, but there was no one around. So I got out of the car to investigate, and that's when I saw it. Right there at the entrance to my driveway was a brand new sign. The thing looked professional, had that shiny metal feel with overflow guest parking authorized by neighborhood association written on it. I was confused as hell. This was my driveway, right? I paid for those pavers. I walked over to one of my neighbors, a woman who lived 2 houses down, and asked if she knew anything about this parking situation. She looked at me like I was the one who didn't get it. She said the HOA had discussed this at their last meeting and decided to designate the unused asphalt area as a guest parking space for events. Apparently parking was a problem during bigger gatherings, so they thought this would help. I couldn't believe it. I told her this wasn't common property. This was my driveway. But she just laughed like I was being some kind of idiot. She said it was obvious this was community property considering the walking trail access. By the time I finally parked 3 blocks away and walked back in the rain, I knew I had to do something. I called the HOA office the next day. When I spoke to the board president, she was immediately dismissive. She told me the board had voted to use the area for community parking and there was nothing I could do about it. I asked her how they had the right to park on my private property. She laughed and said it wasn't private, it was common space, according to them. I told her I'd be reviewing my property deed. That night I spent hours digging through the closing documents. The deed was clear. Our driveway was ours. It had an easement for utility access, but nothing in the documents suggested this was community space. The next day I went to the county clerk's office to pull the original land records. I found the survey that showed our lot was specifically designed as a flag lot with a trail easement running along the edge of our property, not through our driveway. There was no mention of any community access, nothing that gave the HOA the right to claim my driveway. I called the president again with this new info. She wasn't having it. She told me that regardless of technicalities, the driveway had been used by the community for years, and she insisted the HOA could designate it for parking if they wanted. I said, that's fine, but this is still my driveway. She told me if I had a legal problem, I should hire a lawyer. Things got worse. They hired some teenager from the neighborhood to act as a parking attendant. He was directing cars right into my driveway, and my new pavers were getting scratched and covered with oil stains. Then I came home one day to find a notice on my car. It was a violation notice from the HOA saying I needed to move my car from the guest parking area and display a visitor pass. I was being fined for parking in my own driveway. I called the property management company, and they were just as clueless. They said I needed to park in my designated carport. Problem was I didn't have one. I spent the next couple of days getting certified copies of all the relevant documents, including the land survey, easement agreements, and property records. I even researched property rights and found out about something called adverse possession and unlawful taking. I hired a property lawyer. After looking over everything, he confirmed what I already knew. The HOA had no legal right to use my driveway. The easement was for utilities, not for parking. He suggested sending them a cease and desist letter, but I had a different idea. I decided to handle it in a more creative way. The neighborhood's big annual spring gathering was coming up, and this was the event the HOA had been hyping as the big guest parking solution. I rented 4 massive concrete barriers and a forklift, and I had a new sign made up, a professional-looking one just like theirs, but mine said, "Private property. Unauthorized vehicles. Subject to storage fees of $500 per hour." On the morning of the event, I placed the barriers on my driveway just inside my property line and swapped out their sign with mine. I had 3 cars already parked there from the night before, and they were now blocked in. At 7 a.m., the HOA president called furious. She demanded I remove the barriers immediately. I calmly explained that it was my private property, and I had every right to prevent unauthorized vehicles from using it. She threatened to call the police. About 20 minutes later, the cops arrived. After reviewing the documents I handed them, they told the HOA president that this was a civil matter, not something they could get involved in. The officer told her that if people wanted their cars, they'd have to negotiate with me directly. By now, the word had spread. Neighbors were showing up to see what was going on. One guy whose truck was blocked in was especially angry. He threatened to move the barriers himself, and I reminded him that tampering with my property could get him arrested. The HOA president eventually came to me with an offer: remove the barriers and they'd remove the parking signs, acknowledge that it was private property, and pay for the damage to my driveway. But I told her I wanted that in writing first. It took them hours to get the paperwork ready, and by the time it was done, I had the agreement I needed. I let the cars out and the barriers came down. The signs were gone by the evening. The professional cleaning company came and restored my driveway to its original condition. A few weeks later, I used the money from the settlement to install a wrought iron gate at the entrance to my driveway. Now only the people I invite can park in my driveway. The HOA president resigned not long after, and I heard she faced similar issues in her new neighborhood. The whole experience made me realize that sometimes you have to stand your ground no matter how uncomfortable it gets. You have to know your rights and be willing to take action. So here's the moral of the story. Sometimes it's the bold, dramatic moves that get people's attention. And when you know you're in the right, you don't let anyone push you around. Would you have done things differently, or would you have gone straight to court?